If I had a nickel for every time a student of mine or myself did a trill incorrectly, I would have a heck of a lot more than 2 nickels. My name is Josh Gu, and after years of studying the clarinet with some of the best teachers from around the world, I am excited to be sharing my knowledge with you. So go to QuickStartClarinet.com or check the description on this video to see all of the wonderful resources I have to help you reach your clarinet dreams. And of course, subscribe to this channel for weekly clarinet and music tips and tricks. Unfortunately, the notation for trills is often a little bit ambiguous, so I want to give you some rules and guidelines that can hopefully help you to get closer to the right answer. And again, unfortunately, because of the ambiguity, it can always be a little bit up to the context, and ultimately you have to do sort of what sounds best or what seems like the right note to trill to in the context of the music, but hopefully the ideas in this video will give you a little bit of a guide and a place to start. So the first rule, whenever you see a trill that just has the trill, no other markings, the general rule is you start on the note that's written and you go up to the next letter and then play with whatever the key signature is. So let's break that down a little bit because there are a couple layers to that. So say we have something pretty straightforward like a C trill. What we're going to do here is you're going to start on C and then you're going to trill to the next letter, which is D. Very straightforward. I think pretty much anybody who sees this C trill will intuitively trill to a D. Now there is a caveat. Say we had a key signature of D flat major with 5 flats, and there's a D flat in the key signature. So if you saw this same C trill in the key of D flat, then instead of trilling to D natural, you would trill to D flat. So you're still going up to the next letter name, but you're applying the key signature. Same thing could be if you were in the key of E major and there was a D sharp in the key signature. Instead of trilling C to D natural or C to D flat, you would trill from C to D sharp. So you can see how this same symbol and same indication on the page of C with a trill could be 3 potential options depending on the key that you're playing in. And that's why people run into trouble so much when they're trilling, is because it can be a little ambiguous. Luckily here, with the notes start on the C, go up to the next letter name, and then apply the key signature, that will get you through probably 90% of the trills that you come across, if you can remember that, and just make sure that you're always applying that key signature. Now, a situation that might be a little trickier, say again we're in the key of C major. Earlier in the measure there was a D flat. Now do you trill to D natural or do you trill to D flat? Again, this is going to be a little bit situational. Again, the marking on the page simply on its own is quite ambiguous, but I would typically trill to D flat, especially if it's a tonal piece where those harmonies are probably sustaining through the measure, so that D flat from earlier is going to continue as the D flat in the actual trill itself. If you wanted to be very thorough, you could actually look at the harmonies and see if the reason for that D flat still applies there. Maybe the D flat is a passing tone, but that passing tone applies through the whole measure and doesn't resolve until the next measure. Maybe that D flat is part of the harmony in the first part of the measure, but not part of the harmony when you're trilling, and maybe a D natural fits better in the harmony when you're trilling. So there's that little bit of contextual issue that you need to cover there. Now there is a way for composers to be a little bit more specific and nuanced about this, and this is by indicating an accidental on the trilled note. So say we have that C, whether or not there was a D flat earlier in the measure, if there's a flat next to the trill symbol, then that is going to indicate that you do in fact trill from C to D flat. Again, we're just going up one letter name, but then we're applying that flat from the trill symbol, so C to D flat for that trill. Same thing would work if it was C to D sharp, where you would trill with the sharp symbol next to the trill symbol, means that you trill to the sharp of one letter above. So trill with the sharp on C would be C to D sharp. You could also have a trill to the natural, meaning to go one letter up, but the natural version. And that would be a very nice thing for the composer to include if there was a D flat earlier in the measure, and they want you to trill C to D natural, it'd be very nice to have that natural sign included next to the trill symbol. However, there can still be confusion with these flat, natural, and sharps next to the trills. So say instead of being on a C natural, we move that up a half step and we're on a C sharp. Now suddenly there can be a little bit of confusion. Say we have a natural next to the trill sign. That's pretty straightforward. We're still on C, we still go to the note above, and because there's a natural, we're going to be going to D natural. So that all checks out, and that's great. If there was no marking on that, then you go to whatever is in the key signature. So if you're in D major, then you would go to a D natural. If you're in E major, then you would go to a D sharp if there's no symbol. If there's a sharp on it, then you go to D sharp. But what if there's a flat next to the trill? You're on C sharp and you're trilling flat. Based on our understanding of the trill with the flat next to it, that would seem to indicate that it should be a D flat. So you're trilling from C sharp to D flat. Hopefully you can see how that might be a problem because C sharp and D flat are the same note, which leads us to an ambiguity in the notation of the sharp, flat, or natural next to the trill sign. Sometimes the trill with the flat next to it means to do a half step trill, where a trill with a sharp next to it could mean a whole step trill or an augmented second trill, or it could even be a half step trill if we're doing C sharp to trill with a natural. So there's lots of ambiguity there as well with this notation of the trills with the flat, natural, or sharp next to it. Sometimes composers are nice, and in the performance notes they'll say trill with a flat next to it is always a half step. That's a very nice little note to have in a score to help us know what we should actually be trilling to because of that ambiguity. But there's actually a better notation system for trills that I think is the best way to remove all the ambiguity. And this is what I really highly recommend composers do whenever you're writing a trill. So the way to do it is just the normal trill symbol, and then put in parentheses and a little note head the note that you want to trill to. So if we had this C sharp here and we wanted it to go to D, instead of writing trill flat where it's C sharp to D flat, that's very confusing, write the C sharp, in parentheses, write a D above it. And you can use both. You could do trill sharp and write C natural or sharp, it doesn't matter, going to D sharp. But again, just putting that little note in parentheses with the D sharp clarifies everything for where that trill should be going. And it actually gives you the possibility to write tremolos as sort of a trill too, where you can put that little note head in parentheses for whatever note you want, and we'll oscillate between those in a trill-like fashion. So that's the notation system that I strongly encourage composers to use to remove any ambiguity in where your trills should be going. So hopefully that helps to give you at least a starting point for figuring out what note you should be trilling to. Again, there is some ambiguity depending on the trill notation that whatever composer is using, so you always have to look at the context a little bit, maybe try one note or a different note, see what sounds better, especially if you're playing with other people, see what sounds better in the harmony overall. A couple other things that I want to give as just general trill advice. First of all, you never trill down. You always start on the note and then go up. However, sometimes in earlier music generally, the Mozart concerto does this, and pretty much anything earlier than that does this. For the most part, after this, we get away from it. But again, it's contextually dependent on the composer that you're playing. But in that older music, oftentimes we'll start on the higher note. You're still not trilling down. You don't play the note that's written and then trill down. That really never happens. But you might start on the note that you're trilling to and then go down. So it's the difference between da be da be da be da and be da be da be da be da. So you hear that a lot in the Mozart concerto and those kinds of pieces in that era of music. Again, in contemporary music, if you're a composer and you want this, totally doable. the way that I would write it is a grace note of the note that you're going to be trilling to before the trill, and then you have your little note head in parentheses as well. So that tells the performer to dee ba be da be da be da be da for the trill. And while we're at it, I have just 2 quick little performance tips for doing trills, mostly specific to the clarinet, but actually applies to many instruments. First of all, make sure that we hear the actual written pitch pretty clearly at the start and at the end, probably. Don't go to your trill, maybe da ba da ba da da da, and start trilling right away. Try to make sure that we know that we've landed there. Da ba da ba dee ba da ba da ba da ba da, so that it's very clear that that's the anchor of it. Same thing for the end of it. Don't just da da ba ba da ba and not let the trill finish. It's nice to have a start and an end to the trill. Da ba da ba da ba da ba da ba da ba dee. Something like that. Pardon my lovely trill singing, but something where it's okay to start and end in a controlled way. You don't want to just wiggle your finger as fast as you can right away, all the way until it stops. It's very hard to keep track of where you are, and it's hard for the listener to feel that as a rhythmic value because it sort of gets all mushy. My second big performance tip actually very much applies to that too, and it's to not trill too fast. You want to find a sweet spot. Trills sound bad if they're too slow, but they also sound bad if they're too fast. A lot of times students will try to trill so fast that their finger is not actually playing either note clearly, and you're sort of in that in-between where you get stuck like hearing a sort of in-between note and there's not anything coming out clearly. So always trill clearly enough with your fingers and slowly enough that we hear da di da di da di da di da di da di da, rather than where it just feels stuck somewhere in between the 2 notes that you're aiming for. Alright, that's all the trill advice that I have. If anybody has a really great resource that makes it a little bit more concrete for exactly what note to trill to every time, I would love to know about that down in the comments below. If you have any other good tips or tricks for trills, also let me know. And if you have any questions, definitely let me know there as well. Thanks so much for watching this. I hope this helps you to know what note to trill to and how to effectively trill in the future, and I look forward to seeing you in another video.